It's so nice to see some new faces in the audience, and thank you for coming. And certainly, we're better for it for getting public input and being aware of what's going on in the City Council. So, Council, we are working from an amended agenda tonight. And the first thing, just call to your attention, is that under special recognition, item 1, we got an email from the coach, and some of the athletes are actually still practicing for some national competitions, so they're going to be coming sometime in December to be recognized. So, and the other item is on, we have an additional item under item 14, resolution approving contract and bond for 2018-19 sanitary sewer rehabilitation. So, anyway, so the first item tonight under proclamation is Pancreatic Cancer Awareness Month. And I'd like to invite Melinda Thatch to the podium, and I'll go ahead and read this, and I'll let her say a few words after that. Pancreatic Cancer Awareness Month. Whereas in 2018, an estimated 55,400 people will be diagnosed with pancreatic cancer in the United States, and 44,330 will die from the disease. And whereas pancreatic cancer is one of the deadliest cancers and is currently the 3rd leading cause of cancer death in the United States, and is projected to become the 2nd leading case around 2020. And whereas pancreatic cancer is the only major cancer with a 5-year relative survival rate in the single digits at just 9%. And whereas approximately 430 deaths will occur in Iowa in 2018, and whereas the good health and well-being of the residents of Ames are enhanced as a direct result of the increased awareness of the symptoms and risks of pancreatic cancer and research into early detection, causes, and effective treatments. Therefore, I, John A. Haley, Mayor of the City of Ames, Iowa, do hereby proclaim the month of November 2018 as Pancreatic Awareness Month in the City of Ames. Melinda, do you want to share a few words? And here's the proclamation.
Thank you. Thank you so much for recognizing November as Pancreatic Cancer Awareness Month. 6 years ago, at the beginning of November, I had no idea what pancreatic cancer was. And then the Monday before Thanksgiving, my mom was diagnosed with it, and she died 13 days later. And it really doesn't go that fast for most people, but most of them die within the first year. Only 70% of people die within the first year of their diagnosis. And the main way to increase the survival rate is for people to know what the vague symptoms are. The symptoms are so vague, most people wouldn't think twice about them, but if you have 2 or more of these symptoms, please talk to your doctor about the chance that it could be something serious. Abdominal or mid-back pain, about here, I'm going straight to the back because that's where our pancreas is, right through the middle. A loss of appetite, jaundice, which is the eyes or the skin turning yellow, weight loss for no apparent reason, nausea, a change in stool, a recent onset of diabetes, or if diabetes has been controlled, then a sudden spike in a less ability to control it. So, thank you.
And the next item is a celebration tonight. John, is that right? With who's this guy who's coming with you? You look familiar.
Just a little bit.
Hey,
Nice
Eric, good to see you.
Thank you. Mayor and distinguished council members, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Eric Coles, formerly a civil engineer at the City of Ames. And I did switch to the dark side about a year and a half ago and went to work for the Department of Transportation. But tonight I'm here as the Iowa chapter of American Public Works Association awards chairman. And as a part of this position with APWA, I get the privilege of coordinating our annual awards banquet awards ceremony, which was held in Iowa City a month ago. And the other thing I get to do is things like this and come out and present awards to communities for their distinguished or exceptional service and improvements to our continuously aging public infrastructure that we have. Tonight, I am here to recognize the South Skunk River Watershed Basin Improvements Project, the City Hall parking lot, as our chapter project of the year in our environmental category in the $1 to $2.5 million category. Given the city's progressive post-construction stormwater management ordinance, when the city needed to replace the existing asphalt parking lot immediately west of City Hall, they decided to explore stormwater best management practices to hold themselves to the same stormwater management standards as local developers. The design team worked to develop an innovative stormwater treatment solution, one that would not only meet the city's stormwater management requirements, but comply with the special constraints required by IDOLS and SRF-sponsored project funding. The sustainable solution included reconstruction of the parking lot with permeable pavers, surface aggregate storage, bioretention cells, and native landscaping. The city plans to use the project as a stormwater management showcase for community residents, developers, and city staff. The end product resulted in a landscape requiring reduced annual maintenance while removing stormwater from surrounding infrastructure and waterways. The main objective of the project, aside from reconstructing the parking lot, was to utilize the parking lot reconstruction as an opportunity to showcase, again, for the best stormwater management practices on a highly visible site. This investment will allow the city to educate community residents, developers, contractors, and city staff on how to integrate multiple types of stormwater best management practices while meeting the city's post-construction stormwater ordinance requirements. That this was accomplished in a public setting where the city could expand an existing rain gardens is a bonus to the expanded vision of the overall campus improvement project. When I was here, I had the privilege of being a part of this project at the very beginning and working with the design team. And I got to tell you, the folks that the Public Works put together did a fantastic job on that project, all the way from the design team, staff, and as well as the contractor. You should not only be proud of this project, but you as a city should be proud for everything that Public Works does in your name. As a side note, I will be submitting this to the national level for consideration of National Project of the Year. So we'll see how that turns out here in the spring, but that will be going out as well. So with that, I would like to present this plaque to the city. You're very welcome. And thank you for a few minutes of your time.
Thanks. Well, John and Tracy, on behalf of the council, congratulations too on a job well done. It's really an honor to accept the award, and hopefully we'll do well on the national level as well too. So kudos to your staff. So, okay, moving on to a consent agenda. Does council have anything they want to pull tonight?
Mayor, I'd like to pull item 14.
Okay. Anything else? Entertain a motion to approve the remainder of the items, less item 14.
Second.
All right. Roll call.
Sessions,
Aye.
Nelson,
Aye.
Martin.
Aye.
DeAndrea,
Aye.
Garten.
Aye.
Corriere. Aye.
Okay, Gloria.
So I pulled item 14 because I had a question about, in general, how these agreements that we make work. So it seems like staff has done a good job of negotiating with the property owner to come up with a resolution to this issue, but it's cost us a lot of money to do that. And I'm wondering if the agreements that we make are bound to the property owners, or if we ever make agreements that are bound to the property, so that if the property changes hands, the new owner is bound by the same agreement as the previous owner.
So that's a great question. And with the design contract, it's bound to the design of the project. And we were having conversations with the property owner and had come to an agreement on what the design would look like in this case. And we had not processed and gotten the easement recorded when suddenly the property came up for sale, unannounced, and then changed hands very quickly. And so then we got into a situation where the new property owner had different plans for the area, wants to keep it more natural, would actually like to see more of the trees kept instead of extension of the QNet like the other property owner had requested. So it'll be a more natural design, but it would be a change. And so we're working on getting an easement so that we can get that documented, held, and have that understanding so that this wouldn't happen again.
So typically, we have the agreement all in place and don't worry about whether the property is going to change hands or not. But in this
Correct.
case, the timing was off.
Correct. So if we get the easement, then the easement's recorded, and then that's against the land, even if it changes property.
That's my only question.
Motion?
So I would move approval.
Second.
All right. Roll call.
Nelson.
Aye.
Martin.
Aye.
Judy Hansen.
Aye.
Gardner.
Aye.
Corey. Aye. Batchor.
Aye.
Council, if I may have just a personal privilege for a second. On item 8 on the consent agenda, if we could have just 1 minute, Carrie Dixon from Public Art is here. And we have, I think, is a pretty exciting opportunity in the community. So I asked her if she would mind sharing about that. I had meant to pull that item. I didn't, but if you don't mind.
Great.
She and I are excited about it, so I don't know. We'll see how that comes out. So, of course, Carrie's excited about everything, so go ahead,
Thank
Carrie.
you, Mr. Mayor. We're excited about this project with PAC. It came out of a meeting that we held out at Moore Memorial Park with Keith Abraham from Parks and Rec, and started to talk about ways of doing something a little different with our next Art in the Parks project. And out of it came the idea of doing these birdhouses. And we've reached out to several different organizations already, and they're excited to partner with us. And our intent is that we will have various categories that people can enter in based on age group and then groups, and then we're doing a professional category for architects and others who are a little more creative in some ways, and a whimsy area. So these will be, for the most part, functioning birdhouses. We'll target for various different species of birds that are in our area. Work with the parks once that we have them back in to have them placed in appropriate settings for the species of bird. We're also going to do a whimsy category, and these are houses that may or may not be intended to go out for birds to really live in them, but just a creative expression. And in partnering with the Octagon, we'll have a display of these and do selection of a best in show for people have a judged category of pieces. And then we're going to set up funds within our public arts funding to be able to get them put into the parks, to be able to do maintenance for several years. And so that we are able to put them up and then also remove them as they start to deteriorate, because we are anticipating these are all made of natural materials. We know they will not last forever. So we don't want to leave the Parks Department stuck with a bunch of birdhouses throughout the community. And we've got a couple great ideas in working with the Parks and Rec Commission on opportunities in the following year to start going out and doing more things. Sort of like a passport for birdhouses, and can you find it and where is it, and other activities to work with it. And we're also going to engage bringing in some wildlife specialists and other naturalists to talk about some of the species of birds that we really need to help provide for in our community. So we're excited about this, and I thank you for letting me give 2 cents and for the council for approving our project. We appreciate it.
Question about cleaning them out.
Yeah, the maintenance, someone asked me about this, if the maintenance that you spoke of would include like cleaning out.
Yeah, we're working with Parks and Rec to make sure we've got adequate, as these houses are designed, and the ones that are installed do have adequate ventilation for the birds that will live in them. We have ways to clean them out so that every year, and we'll either work with being able to pay Parks and Rec employees or work with volunteers in some of these areas to clean them out. And then we anticipate annually for probably about the next 3-4 years, we're going to have to inspect them at the beginning of every season and remove the ones that are no longer sturdy.
Sounds good, thank you.
He also mentioned too about the kits that might be available.
Oh, yes. We do plan on, there will be the possibility for individuals to create their own, to design and build their own. We're also going to work with purchasing kits for various species of birds so that individuals can go and pick those up from the Parks and Rec office, so that there isn't any kind of barricade for anybody participating in this opportunity.
I think it's going to be a great opportunity for everyone from preschool on up to whatever age they want to be part and parcel of art and actually being learning and being out in the parks. And I think it's just an exciting project. Kudos to
we've-
Public Arts.
We looked at a couple other communities who've done things like this, and some of them are very traditional birdhouses, and some of them are like the Biltmore of birdhouses and very, very ornate. So we're hoping to get all kinds of different things to draw people out to experience the parks.
Well, thanks for your leadership, Carrie. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Okay, next item on the agenda is public forum, and this is a time for anyone from the public who can address council for the time of 3-minute time limit on anything which is not on the agenda this evening. And so I'll declare public forum open. Is there anybody here who wants to address council on anything which is not on the agenda tonight? Seeing none, I'll close public forum. I'll go on to item 18, resolution approving request refund pertaining to South Duff Signal Project to EM Hunziker in the amount of $17,003. John?
Thank you. Council originally received this report in the non-agenda packet on the last meeting and then asked that it be brought back as a discussion item tonight. So hopefully the report does a adequate job of setting the background of this issue and then also what led to the advice of the city attorney. So I'd be happy to try to answer any questions if you have any.
Any questions for staff? Other time, I was entertain a motion.
The only thing I had is, this is sort of an unfortunate, I think, miscommunication between the parties. And hopefully there's a lesson that we've incorporated in future agreements that will minimize the risk of this. Do we want to go ahead and make a motion?
Yep.
Is there a particular option?
No, we will reimburse the
applicant,
applicant
$17,000.
I'll move approval of the
reimbursement.
proposal for reimbursement of $17,003.
Second.
All right. Moving second. Any discussion?
I just have a question. Has there been any further communication regarding this issue since it's been referred to council?
No.
No? So
Before it was referred to council, there was.
before, yeah, but not following the report that was provided to us, which we then referred to for this evening.
Yeah, we just informed the applicant, I guess you'd say, that it was in the non-agenda packet last meeting and that had been referred for tonight.
And so it's reasonable to assume that they've read it and they understand what we're looking at.
Yes.
They're not speaking tonight. That's why I'm asking.
That's correct. They've received it. Yep.
Thank you.
Okay. Roll call.
Martin.
Hi.
Beanie Hansen.
Aye.
Carton.
Aye.
Fourier.
Aye.
Betcher.
Aye.
Nelson.
Aye.
Okay, item 19. The applicant has requested that this item be tabled until December 18th. They're working on some additional information. So council could have a motion to table this to December 18th?
So moved.
Second.
Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed or abstaining? Motion carried. Item 20, resolution authorizing use of eminent domain if necessary to obtain easements and acquire land for East Industrial Area Utility Extension Project. Tracy? Or
Yes, thank you very much. I would like to introduce one of our civil engineer twos, Nate Willie. Is with us tonight to present this item, so I will pass this to him.
Great, thanks. So currently we are in the easement and land acquisition phase for this project. On this project, we are trying to get permanent and some temporary construction easements from 11 different property owners. And also, we are trying to acquire about 2 acres of land from one property owner. And that being a key piece to this project. It's for a lift station and a future water tower. As of right now, we have 5 easements signed by property owners out of those 11. And the land acquisition has been approached with our appraisal from A&R Land Services, who we're working with for all these easement acquisitions and the land acquisition as well. And so far, there's not been an agreement for that land acquisition. And as staff, I've been working with a lot of these property owners trying to reach resolutions on these acquisitions. And the reason for this request is just to authorize eminent domain only if necessary. We'd like to do that this time so that we prevent any delays in trying to get this project bid out, hopefully as early as we can this coming spring.
Any questions for Nate?
Just a comment for people who are watching. Eminent domain has a lot of negative stigma. There have been situations where perhaps it's not been used properly. The eminent domain we're using here for a lift station and future water tower are clearly in the category of the use for necessary public improvements. And our goal would not be to use eminent domain, but to have this as a fallback should negotiations not prove fruitful.
Okay. Is there anybody, open public comment? Is there anybody in the audience that wishes to address council on this particular topic? Seeing none, I'll close public comment. Any further discussion from council? Again, to restate for what Tim was just talking about, this is authorized only if necessary. Okay. Entertain a motion?
Move alternative 1.
Second.
And would you mind reading?
Sure. To authorize the use of eminent domain if necessary to obtain easements and acquire land for the East Industrial Area Utility Extension Project.
Okay, been moved and seconded. Any discussion? All right, roll call, please.
Hanson.
Aye.
Burton.
Aye.
Poirier. Aye. Batchor.
Aye.
Nelson.
Aye.
Martin.
Aye. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Item 21, Story County Housing Trust. Brian?
Introduce the concept. Housing trust.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Just by way of introduction, 2 years ago, during the City Council's budgeting process, the council allocated funding for the Story County Housing Trust. And the city has received an invoice for the second of the payments for that funding. However, we don't have any parameters laid out in an agreement or so forth identifying what must be done for that funding. So we thought this would be a good opportunity for the council to receive an update about the activities of the Housing Trust and answer any questions you might have about how things will work moving forward. I should also note that since that initial round of funding, which was sort of the get it started process, the Housing Trust has applied through our outside funding request process. You saw their requests for the current year back in February and allocated funding for the current year as well. So we have a contract and they'll be following through that process moving forward. But for this second payment for the initial round of funding, we thought it'd be good to give you an update. So,
Do you want to introduce your guest there?
I don't know that he knows me, so I'll introduce myself.
Hi, Brenda.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council of the City of Ames. Brenda Dreyer, and tonight I am representing the Story County Housing Trust Fund. I have the opportunity to sit on that board. I serve in a vice chair role for that organization. So first and foremost, on behalf of the Story County Housing Trust Fund Board of Directors and the citizens of our great county, thank you for your support of this organization. Quite frankly, it's been a very crazy and busy first year trying to get this organization established here in Story County. In your board council packets, there is a recap of the accomplishments and achievements really dating back to 2017 when the trust fund was established that fall through really today's point in time in 2018. The Story County Housing Trust Fund actually functions on a calendar year. So that's always interesting as we work with our governmental units, but we're really wrapping up our 2018 as an organization. We were actually certified as a housing trust fund, which is quite a lengthy process. And we held our first meeting back in September of 2017 and took our first allocation of funding and collected our local match for that funding right about the first of the year. Last year was really a unique year. We received almost $240,000 from the state and then matched that with almost $50,000 from our public entities and raised another $12,500 in private donations. We had our first funding round cycle and we focused on owner-occupied repair, and we were able to support applications really from 6 organizations. And what I would tell you is if you look at the list, that organization those organizations are spread across Story County. I'd like to highlight the Habitat for Humanity application, supported a project here in Ames. In Ames, citizens that do qualify are able to request funding assistance from Micah and the Cornerstone Church Third Place organization. But again, very excited about how well the funds were able to be spread across the county. We issued contracts, and I'm pleased to tell you that a great number of those projects have actually been started, and folks across the county, housing situations improved as a result of these funds. We have submitted our second round of funding application. We do anticipate if that is approved that we should receive about $216,000. And shortly after the first of the year, we'll convene again and take action to decide when our funding cycles will be in 2019. Again, thank you for your support. I'd welcome any questions you might have about the information that was included in your council packets or in general about the organization.
Brenda,
Yes.
with the owner-occupied repair grants,
Mhm.
do you know how many grants requests were received?
In terms of applications, or actual folks that have applied for funds.
Well, what's the difference?
So the Story County Housing Trust Fund does not accept applications from individuals. We make our awards to organizations that are able to support citizens across the county. So the funding is targeted at those folks that make 60% or less of the countywide median based on household size. So in terms of the applications we receive as an organization, we're focused on funding organizations that can provide help ultimately to the folks across the county. But we were, for the most part, able to, with a little tweaking to the request, able to fund all 6. All 6 met the criteria of the program, and we felt really that it was really important this first year to do our part to disperse those funds as much as possible. As we look to 2019, we are committed to rental and assisting with rental. But as you all know, that is not, we're trying to really identify the area where we can have the most impact. And so as we look at that, the discussions are really focused. What can we do? Really, how can our funds, while they seem like there's a lot, this is a big county with a lot going on. So how can we focus those dollars in a way that it may be meaningful? So next year when we're sitting in this seat, I hope we can have a good plan and tell you how we've actually dispersed a portion of those funds to support rental.
And so with the 6 organizations that we see listed here.
Yep.
Is the trust fund tracking how that money is distributed so we know what the impact is among individuals who are
So
applying?
absolutely. So when an organization receives funds from the trust fund, they have 2 years to actually get those dollars out and awarded to individuals. And really, they can also come back. The rules with the Iowa Finance Authority also allow us to give them a year extension. And so it's going to take a bit, again, where we can actually provide you the results. So we've targeted kind of the minimum number of units that these funds have to support our goal would be is that ultimately that we'll be able to serve quite a bit more, just assuming that most people will not use all of the max funding per applicant. Other questions?
Can you, I'm intrigued. I mean, first of all, I think this is great that we're taking these positive steps to help people that really need it. Is there a specific mission and objective stated anywhere for the Story County Housing Trust?
You know, Mayor, I believe that had to be a part of our actual housing plan submitted to IFA in terms of what our objective was. And each year, we have to go in and create a housing plan.
Okay.
And really, being really in the early stages of an organization, really the initial two things that we focused on is enhancing the situation for folks that own their homes, knowing that often that is the most affordable thing we can do is to make some improvements, minor improvements to actually stabilize a place where a person is living, and then also rental. And that's a little unique across the trust funds in the state. It's a little harder to try to come up with a plan that's impactful, that is enhancing programs that are already out there. But those are really our two focus areas. I'm sure there was some sort of a global mission statement included in the original plan.
The mission statement is actually to address the housing needs of low-income persons in Story County by providing innovative and flexible funding from various federal, state, and local sources of revenue to produce new and preserve existing affordable housing, promote homeownership, and support homeless and transitional housing services.
Great.
And that's why she's the chair. She had that right handy.
Well, I think it's important people understand that that the owner occupied repair grants fits in exactly with the mission we're trying to accomplish. And I can't think of a better way to preserve existing affordable housing stock than helping to extend the life of those, through these repairs, and especially for those that may not be able to afford it. And I did jump on the state housing trust, and it looks like they're also very interested in trying to promote affordable housing. I was just curious with our new home funds, is that going to be able to be taken advantage of or leveraged too? Is that right? Or
Yes, there are certainly opportunities for the trust fund to partner with the city and how home funds are distributed and
Great.
used.
that's exciting.
It is. Thank you again.
Other questions for Brenda? Thank you for coming in the report.
If I may, just so that I understand this clearly. So what I'm hearing is that we're talking about the priorities for next calendar year, because that's how the trust fund operates. And what council is being asked to consider is to provide the funding that pays actually for our fiscal year portion. Is that right?
The one we're currently in?
The one we're
If the one
currently
we're
in, or?
currently in.
So you're being asked whether we should pay for, whether we should authorize the funding for the last fiscal year, which the most recent invoice was for, and then
17-18.
for 17-18, right, the year ending June 30th, 2018. And then in the future, we will receive invoices for the current fiscal year.
I see. And so next year, before we authorize what next year's priorities are, next year you'll be explaining them in somewhat more detail, I imagine. Thank you.
Okay, entertain a motion to accept the report of activities.
And authorize them.
And you can do it in one motion, and resolution authorizing payment in amount of $34,000.
Yeah, I would move that we accept the report and authorize payment of the $34,000 requested by the Story County Housing Trust
For fiscal year 17-18.
for fiscal year 17-18.
Second.
Okay, a discussion? Is there anybody in the audience? I'll open up public comment. Anyone in the audience like to address council on this particular topic? Seeing none, we'll close public input and roll call.
Aye.
Abstain due to conflict of interest?
Betcher,
Aye.
Nelson,
Aye.
Martin,
Aye.
Edie Hansen.
Aye.
Thank you. This is great. Appreciate it very much.
Thank you.
Okay, I've been brought to my attention that there are a number of people out in the foyer who'd like to come in as well. So I'm just kidding. If you would sit on your laps. We're actually going to take a short 5-minute break. They're actually going to, for the last row on the back wall, they're going to actually open up the demountable wall so we can get more seating in here so everybody can kind of come in. And also, I'd like to bring to everyone's attention, if you're interested in providing any input, there are orange cards out, or salmon color, whatever you want to call them, out in the foyer. If you would please fill them out and see. We'll try and have a couple people circulating to pick them up, and then we'll bring them up here, and then we'll call you and recognize you during the public input. So we're going to take a quick 5-minute break while they reconfigure the council chambers here, and then we'll reconvene.
Mayor, the cards are actually orange and black. I just want to point
Okay,
out
orange
those
and black.
meaningful colors.
Okay, we're back in session. And Tashik is in the back. She can raise your hand. And she'll collect any cards. And this is not to constrain you. If you have a desire to make a comment during public input, you still can, but you need to bring a card up with your name. The reason we do this is because it gives us the ability to make sure you get your spelling right and your address correctly for the record, and that's required for everyone who gives public input. So anyway, what we'll do is we'll have a staff report, we'll have some initial council questions for staff, then we'll open up public input, and then we'll go back to council for additional discussion and any action should they decide to go ahead and move forward tonight on these items. So anyone else have cards for Tashik? Okay, very good. Brian, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. Before I get started, I want to acknowledge some of the other staff members who have contributed to this research effort. Next to me is Dwayne Pitcher, Director of Finance, who also has some information technology related responsibilities in that role. Don Com, Director of Electric Services. Tashik Kher, who you mentioned, has done some of the research on this report, and Susan Guiazza has also done some of the public information gathering as well. I'm going to take a little bit more time than I typically would to go over some of the aspects of this report, just because there are a lot of policy issues to consider here, and there's obviously a lot of public interest as well. And so I want to make sure that some of the background information is really solidly understood. So I apologize if this is repetitive for some of the folks here up at the council dais and also in the audience, but I'll try to go as quickly as I can. So why are we here? The council established through its goal setting session about a year ago, an initiative to explore possible improvements in internet options for residents and businesses, including the aspects of availability, speed, cost, reliability, customer service, and policy. And as we started to unpack that and figure out how to approach it, we looked to some common definitions of some of the technical terms that we're going to be using. So for instance, the term broadband, we use the FCC definition of broadband, which is 25 megabits per second download and 3 megabits per second upload. We think it's important to have that common definition as we discuss some of the options here. Unfortunately, that leads us to one of the big challenges in this effort, which is a lack of clear, publicly available data to help us understand what the overall picture is in the community. We have a lot of information from residents who share their stories about their particular issues and concerns and priorities, but we don't have very good data to outline for us on a lot-by-lot basis in the community what exactly is going on. What is the accessibility? What is the speed? What is the cost? All of those other components. And so that limits some of what we're able to present to you tonight. But I want you to understand that was one of the first big roadblocks that we ran into. And we'll try to get beyond that as much as we can. There are some resources available publicly. The FCC does publish a broadband map where you can go and plug in your address and it will tell you what service providers are in what areas and what sort of speeds you might expect from them. There are some differences in terms of the advertised speed that a provider might be able to provide and the actual experience that a user might have depending on different constraints in their equipment and the amount of traffic on the network and where it's going and things of that nature that make for misalignment perhaps between somebody's expectations and what reality is when they're trying to get service. And so that can be a source of frustration and aggravation. And unfortunately, this information, again, is not available in a very accurate way for us to drill down into and understand where the gaps are and what exactly they are and what can be done to improve them. We have had conversations with the two major internet providers in the community, Mediacom and CenturyLink. We had a meeting with Mediacom representatives over the summer to outline the issues that the council was interested in exploring. And we asked for some information about what things have worked in other communities to help improve these issues. So where is the community just in love with the service that Mediacom provides and how it provides it, and what are they doing there that is different than here? Is it a policy decision of the local government? Is it just something to do with the nature of the infrastructure or the way the community is laid out or other factors? We also asked for what are the impediments to providing better service in different areas of town? Where are the big gaps and what could be done to improve those? And then finally, we also asked for a service coverage map so that we could overlay that with information from CenturyLink and identify really where are the parts of the community that fall through the gaps or fall through the cracks and don't have real effective service. Unfortunately, we did not receive answers to those inquiries, and we weren't able to meet. We didn't receive any response to meet from representatives of CenturyLink. So there's a lack of information there that I'm not sure we have a good answer for how to get that information. We've also gathered resident feedback through a couple of different mechanisms. We had an online survey back in 2017 asking Ames residents about their internet use experiences, what impediments they have to their full satisfaction with the service. We had a fairly decent response to that, about a little over 700 respondents. And I should caution that this information, the survey results, and the focus group, which I'll talk about in a minute, these aren't random samples of Ames residents or businesses. And so there's a little bit of caution about the results there. These are people who are self-selected, and I would characterize them as highly interested users of internet services. So we did not see a lot of results that indicated that people were extremely happy with their internet options and service and speed and quality and so forth. That may not come as a surprise. Additionally, we conducted a focus group more recently of some of the users. I know the council members have been collecting names of people who have come to them and indicated they have particular problems. And so we held a focus group to understand a little bit more what kinds of issues they were having, and that information pretty well aligns with the information we received in the survey. One of the challenges that we have is that in looking at where these responses come from, there doesn't appear to be a particular area of the community where if we address this one area, it would solve most people's concerns. It appears that the concerns are coming from all areas of the community. In fact, people on the same street may have different levels of accessibility, whether they can get service or not, whether it's fast service or slow service, and so forth. And so that makes this pretty challenging to try to address. There's not a silver bullet that we can implement to fix the problems that people are experiencing. So the lack of data here is one limitation. Another limitation that we have is that even if we knew where these issues were exactly, our hands are constrained in terms of ability to regulate the current providers. We don't have the ability to tell the providers who to serve and how to serve them. There are restrictions on that in state and federal law. However, the city does have the option to enter the marketplace as a provider, or to at least influence the providers in ways that don't amount to regulation. And there are some models that we've outlined for you after looking at models across the country for how internet service is influenced or provided by local governments. The first model is the retail model. There are 4 total. The retail model is the most involvement of the local government in the internet game, right? It is, we become a provider, we compete in the marketplace with providers for customers. This is the model that requires the most infrastructure investment on the part of the city. It would require capital financing that's not insignificant, and operating expenses that would be fairly significant as well. But the benefit to this type of model is that it provides the most direct control over the types of things that people are interested in. The speed, the quality, the prices, all those types of things would be policy decisions that could be directed by the city. So there are some trade-offs there. The second model is a wholesale service model where we identify what areas we might be able to install infrastructure and then lease it to existing providers. So to aid in their addressing service gaps in the community. There are some examples in here of other communities that have taken this approach. This particular model involves less risk than entering the game as a direct competitor in a retail model. But it also has significant expenses and some risk. If the service providers decide that they can provide service more cost effectively by installing their own infrastructure, then we have a large investment in infrastructure that goes unused. The third model that we've outlined here is a franchise model where the community provides access to the right-of-way in exchange for a franchise fee. This particular model does not work as effectively in Ames as it might in other communities. In Ames, our right-of-way use is pretty open for utilities and telecommunications. So we don't charge right-of-way fees for the use of the right-of-way. We don't require necessarily that those private providers obtain private easements for their own lines. They can go in the right-of-way. It's just that they have to move their infrastructure if we have a need to move it through, let's say, another project that's interfering with it. So we don't really have the ability to incentivize through this type of model additional growth for those, or additional service for internet providers. And then the fourth model that was identified through the research is a community ownership and deployment model. And this involves a little bit more creativity where you would find other institutional users perhaps, or large internet users, and partner together with them to develop your own network. And this might be something that's done in a smaller area, or it might be expanded to the entire community. But the risk is shared by the participating institutions, perhaps other government entities or other large institutions that have an interest in having their own internet infrastructure. And then it would be the responsibility of those partners through that partnership agreement to provide the service down to the end user level. We've also outlined for you what it would take from a legal and financial standpoint to implement a city-operated internet utility. The first two models that we've outlined, the retail and the wholesale model, both require a pretty substantial infrastructure investment, and it would take some time to build those out. There are also a lot of questions that would need to be answered before we could enter that market. And so before we would take any steps to create a city-owned utility through one of those models, we would need to implement a feasibility study and understand better the detail about who our potential customers are and what the market looks like, what are the potential costs for the infrastructure, the ongoing operations and maintenance, and then also what the pricing would have to look like. We need to understand what our market saturation would have to be in order for it to break even and be successful, and determine whether or not that would be viable for us to proceed. So that would be the first step in that kind of an undertaking. Following that, there are two additional steps that we would need to consider. One is the establishment of a utility, a separate utility, and that would require a referendum vote. There are some different mechanisms through which the referendum could be initiated, but it would ultimately require a vote of the community to determine whether to enter that marketplace. And then second, we would need to figure out exactly how the financing would work. I think it's fair to say that in Iowa, the state law does not incentivize or encourage municipalities to enter the marketplace as an internet provider. There are a lot of constraints. The internet utility would not be able to be subsidized by other sources of revenue. And there are a few methods that we would be able to use in order to raise the capital for the initial investment. The most likely source of financing would have to be basically a bank loan. It wouldn't be able to be bonded for. But we would need to learn more through a feasibility study, what other potential alternatives there might be out there for financing and so forth. Additionally, once the utility was implemented, because it can't be subsidized, the utility would have to stand on its own through revenues raised from subscribers for its ongoing operations. And there's a significant reporting requirements to ensure that we meet those financial standards that are set forth in state law. In addition to these 4 options for entering the marketplace potentially as an internet provider, staff has also taken a look at some of the potential policies that we might consider exploring short of entering the marketplace that might make it easier for the current providers to provide service more effectively throughout the community. One alternative could be accommodating internet fiber infrastructure in city electrical conduit. This would require some more study to ensure the technical feasibility of it, but installing conduit and installing fiber underground is an expensive proposition. And in new subdivisions, we put electrical infrastructure underground. And there may be some opportunities for us to explore putting fiber in with that electrical conduit in a way that doesn't interfere with the operations of the electric utility and also wouldn't interfere with the internet infrastructure. There are some technical challenges we would need to overcome, but there would also be some questions that we would need to look at in terms of the cost, for example. So this would present an increased cost for us to provide this conduit. Who would pay that cost? Is that something that would be borne by the electric utility and so effectively subsidized by the utility customers because they would pay for it through their rates? Or is this something we would charge back to the providers, and if so, how? Additionally, there's a limitation here because the electric utility service territory is different than the community's territory, right? It's different than the city limits. And so there would be portions of the community that would be able to benefit from this and portions of the community that would not be able to benefit from this. We also have taken a look at, just briefly, the concept of reducing our pole attachment fees. So the electric utility has about 6,000 electrical poles throughout the community in the service territory. And we charge a fee for other utilities and telecommunications providers to attach their lines to those poles. We could consider reducing or eliminating those fees, which would lose a source of revenue to the utility, but would potentially make it more encouraging for internet providers to extend their infrastructure in a less costly manner for them. And then finally, we've looked at, again, these are just ideas that we've initially explored, implementing some subdivision requirements to provide internet infrastructure to new subdivisions. This would give us some ability to control the minimum standards that are expected for new subdivisions. This doesn't address any issues in infill areas in the community, the established neighborhoods and business districts in the community, but it certainly could make an impact in areas outside the community or that will newly be annexed in and developed. It would likely add some cost to development. However, at the same time, we're not entirely sure how much this is being done already. I get the sense that it may be being handled directly by developers with the internet service providers. But some type of requirement would ensure that it wouldn't be something that would be missed and overlooked at the development stage. So that would help ensure that in the future it's the community is built out with more internet infrastructure. So those are the initial thoughts that we have. We are available for questions. And at this point, the question for the council really is, what next steps do you wish us to pursue? If you would like us to look more seriously at some of the internet models, we're probably looking at heading towards a feasibility study as a next step. Or if you'd like us to take a look further at gathering data, we could certainly do that, or look at some of these additional alternatives that may improve internet access that don't involve creating a utility. We can explore those further as well.
Okay. Initial questions for staff? I have a couple. You started by describing the FCC definitions for what counts as broadband. And I think you said FCC lists 25 megabit per second download as broadband. So, but at the same time, we also attempted to do a survey of properties in Ames to see who was served by what company. Now, Mediacom is a cable TV company. Generally, they provide much higher speeds than that. But CenturyLink is mostly a DSL company, isn't that true?
Yes.
Yeah, so what sort of speeds do people report generally using DSL service in Ames?
I'd have to go back and look at the survey data. I don't have that information off the top of my head.
Okay.
I believe in general it's less.
So you think it's probably less than 25 megabits per second, probably more in the 1 to 2 range, or 3, or no, you don't.
I don't have it off.
You don't know. You don't know. But I
We-
guess
We
John?
did have the focus group and asked them if their provider was Mediacom or CenturyLink, and I think one was served by CenturyLink. All the other people in our focus group were all Mediacom, so we didn't get a good sense what CenturyLink was providing out there to the focus group.
I see. Although if it's true that CenturyLink service tends to be, let's just say, under 10 megabits per second on average, then trying to map out the city on the basis of who has Mediacom and filling in the gaps with who has CenturyLink, then that might actually be underreporting the gaps, even if we could do that, right?
If your threshold, yes, if your threshold is the FCC threshold that you want the whole community to be served by a minimum 25 megabits per second, then yeah, that would be the case.
Yeah, that's what I was getting at. Thank you. And then another thing you mentioned about how the state law and regulations would require that a communications utility operate on the basis of its subscriber revenue without cross-subsidization, right? Are there examples of Iowa communities that are in fact doing that now?
Cedar Falls, for example, has their own telecommunications section within the utility, but it's separate.
It's right, okay. But I guess what I'm getting at is I was under the impression that it's possible to actually do that and be successful, and that there are examples of that in Iowa. And is that your belief as well?
Yes, there are telecommunication utilities owned by municipals that are successful.
Right. Thanks. That's all I have right now. Any questions?
Yeah, I've got a couple. So we have these potential city policies that are listed. Is it our sense that if we were planning to do one of the models on here, that we would not also do the policy changes? Are these two things mutually exclusive? Are the policy changes something that could be implemented in the short term if we were moving for something else long term? What's the relationship?
I don't think they're. I think you could explore multiple avenues at the same time. The 3 policy potential policy changes were ideas that we came up with in discussion that I don't think would require the level of expertise of a full-blown feasibility study. I think we could look at them just in a more informal fashion and get answers about whether they're feasible or not ourselves, but we don't want to take those steps without your direction. I'm trying to think if the council's direction is to go towards the end of the spectrum where we are an internet provider, it may not in the long term make sense for us to explore those policy alternatives. They may not be as important, but I don't think there's any harm in exploring them immediately, other than just the time it would take to review them and understand them in more detail.
If I could comment a little bit, for example, on policy 1, looking at internet, fiber, and cabling, please be aware that there are 4 different electric utilities serving Ames residents. The majority of homeowner growth is not happening in the Ames service territory, so we would not be touching those customers from an electric service standpoint. Most of the growth is happening in 2 of the other utilities. Our growth is limited to, from a residential standpoint, to north of Bloomington areas where those homes in there are being served by electric services.
So Don, you actually anticipated the next question I was going to ask, sort of. First of all, let me just make sure I've got these. The providers are Ames, Alliant, Consumers. What's
and
the
Midland.
Midland is,
up in
okay.
Northridge Heights area, yeah.
So if we were to investigate policy number 1, it's very easy for us to investigate that for our utility. Is there any potential for investigating whether some of these other utilities would be willing to partner on it?
It never hurts to talk to them. It could vary widely. We could jointly lay conduit with them when they're in there putting in their electric. There are several different models that could work. We would have to explore that and see what could happen, but it would be at a cost because we're not in there laying our electric. So it's sort of like brand new service, and then who would maintain it and that type of stuff.
I think that's it.
Any other additional questions for staff?
Oh, wait, I do have one additional question.
Okay.
So I don't see any Iowa cities listed as models here. Is there a reason for that?
I don't think so.
I'm just curious because, of course, everybody brings up Cedar Falls, and I know other places are doing different things. So it struck me that we didn't see any Iowa cities listed. But
I don't think it was an intentional choice.
okay.
And as a slight clarification, although Cedar Falls is a municipal, the electric utility in that particular case is not under city council purview. They actually have a standalone electrical board. So it's a slightly different model in the way that Cedar Falls is set up.
So I was under the impression that the laws pertaining to cities subsidizing internet services is new. Is that not correct?
That Cedar
So
Falls built their
did Cedar
utility-
Falls get grandfathered in is my question. That's my impression.
That they built their utility
Before the law went into place.
prohibited the use of other funding for telecommunications. Is that the case? They put
in the
2009.
infrastructure prior to this
Correct.
law change. I would assume that they're, obviously been in place for operation, so I don't know that they were grandfathered in under that. But they put in this infrastructure years ago.
Right, I'm
with cable
aware of
TV,
that. I'm just
right.
wondering, since the subsidy portion of the law is newer, if Cedar
Yes,
Falls is currently subsidizing, because that's my understanding.
Yeah, I'm
Is
not
it?
sure.
Okay.
I don't know.
Okay. All right. We'll go ahead and open up public comment on this topic. And I have a number of cards here, so I'll call people up. I would encourage people to certainly, stick to facts. We would ask you not be denigrating or criticizing providers. We understand that there are some challenges here, but we're really trying to be proactive here, look for your feedback. And if you could also comment on the staff report, which is just talked about, and give us your input on the different models as well, too. So with that said, we'll start with, I believe it's Ildo Freeberg.
And John, if someone doesn't have a particular preference on that, they don't have to.
They don't have to,
that.
no. That's great. Thank you for clarification.
Are we limiting time for folks?
Oh, yeah, and we'll ask people to limit their comments to 3 minutes. And we'll set a timer. My favorite is all timer. So anyway, Ildo?
Ido.
I'm sorry. My apologies. If you please come to the podium and introduce yourself and give your address verbally, and then you'll go ahead and have 3 minutes. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Ido Friedberg, 908 Vermont Circle, Ames, Iowa. And thank you for taking the time to listen to me I think that people can see by the number of the council can see that by the number of people here in the audience. There's quite a bit of interest. And as was alluded to by the panel here, probably not an interest due to satisfaction with the internet service, or rather they'd like to see a better one. I also emailed the council earlier today with my particular experience. I will not repeat that here. I would like to comment on the report on the retail model, that I was a little bit surprised at the lack of a few things there. So it was already commented that there was no Iowa city mentioned. That was a bit odd. I won't repeat that. I would say, for example, that recently Pella has actually approved a municipal telecommunications utility. So I'm not exactly privy to all the ins and outs of the laws, and some of the laws are more recent. So maybe the Cedar Fall model cannot be repeated exactly as such, but obviously cities are still getting into a municipal model. So that is something that is worth exploring. I'm also a little bit surprised at why money cannot be raised by bonding. Maybe that can be answered later after I yield my time. But by a loan, I thought that bonding would be a good model to do that. I would like to comment that I believe that in Ames, which is a college town with a large population that is well educated and makes strong use of the internet, I believe that such a model would eventually pay for itself. That is one of the risks. I don't think it's a high risk. I think that people would happily subscribe to a working internet. And finally, I'd like to read what is written back there. As a city, we are committed to fostering creativity and innovation at the forefront of the world's important issues in the Midwest, that the Midwest is uniquely positioned to address. And that includes things like agriculture, veterinary medicine, sustainability, development, and so forth. As I said to my letter to the council, the internet are really the economic engine of the 21st century, as roads were for all the previous centuries, basically. I think we should have better roads in this town. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you. Please don't. We would ask your audience to refrain from clapping, please. All right, Troy DeJude. I apologize, I'm not properly.
Okay, you're not the first person.
Would you please help me?
Sure. My name is Troy DeJode. I'm the executive director of the Iowa Association of Municipal Utilities, 1735 Northeast 70th Avenue, Ankeny. I have a few comments I would make. First of all, I'm a recovering lawyer, so let's throw something if I talk past my 3 minutes. We represent 541, we're the trade association for 541 municipal water utilities, 136 municipal electric utilities, including yours, 51 natural gas utilities, and 25 operating municipal broadband utilities. There are about 73 communities in the state that have passed a referendum. So 25 or so that are operating. They operate them in a variety of different ways, including the ways your staff laid out. I would say this first, you are in an enviable position because you have the staff that you have. You have staff who can do their research and are well qualified financially, technologically, everything. That is not the case everywhere I go. Hold on, I lost my... They range in size from Lenox or Paulina all the way to Cedar Falls, as they mentioned. Muscatine are probably the two biggest, other than that would be on par with Ames. Full disclosure, in a past life, I was an electrical engineer at the Cedar Falls Utilities and general counsel. So I wasn't there at the time of the formation of the utility, broadband utility, but I was there immediately after for about 8 years. They are governed by a board. I think that is fundamentally a little bit different, but they have, they were built prior to the 388.10. They are not exempt from it. No one's exempt from it. The advantage they may have is that they got to maturity before it became law. But they don't cross-subsidize, and they never really have. They never have. They got there through different means. My first thing is I'm not advocating for municipalization. As an association, the last thing I want to do is advocate for something, have you make a decision, and 2 years down the road, have somebody screaming at me saying, we made a terrible decision on your advice. My job, our job as the association, is to try to be a trusted resource to help you and your staff and to make the decision that's best for you. At the end of the day, we are all about local control and local decision making. And what's right in your community may not be right everywhere else. There are three things that I would say that the most successful utilities have. They are market demand, which I see a room full of people. That also is you need really strong community leadership, not the people necessarily sitting around this table or on staff. And you got to have a way to finance it. And that's hard. That's really hard. There's one other that I always tell people I think makes Cedar Falls a little bit unique. And that is at the time, probably 85 or 90,000 people that lived in Waterloo. Probably a lot less than that today. But that insulated them from some of the scorched earth competition tactics that other communities have seen. I don't have a comment. I wrote pro because there was pro and con and nothing else on the salmon colored sheet, and they'd run me out of my job if I checked con. So I checked pro, but it's really to let you know that we're here, we're willing to help. And it really is in a way that we want you to make the best decision that's right for your community. And like I said, that's not always right for everyone. We do see a lot of those 25 were long ago, 90s, 2000. But we're seeing more and more. The gentleman before me mentioned Pella, and I heard the beep, so I'll stop.
All right.
Right? Thank you.
John, can I ask one question?
Sure.
Just as a data point, Troy. So the newspaper is going to cover articles about communities that adopt a community infrastructure, community internet infrastructure. But we don't see as many headlines and articles about communities that do a feasibility study, look at it, kick the tires, and say, we can't make the numbers work. We're concerned about the need. We hear the need. We can't make the numbers work. Do you have information on communities that have gone through that process?
So I don't off the top of my head. There certainly are communities that do that. They do feasibility studies. As a general rule, I tell communities that every step you take towards being a provider gets you better service in your community. So if you do a feasibility study, it makes people more interested in investing in your community. Not you, current providers. We have 73 municipals that have passed referendums, only 25 operating. In a great many of those cases, I think you would find that those communities that aren't operating have better service than they had before the referendum. That is anecdotal. I'm not gonna, but I've met enough people to know that to be confident in saying that's a true statement.
Okay, thank you.
Can I just ask you something quickly? Sure. You mentioned scorched earth tactics. Yeah. Is that on behalf of the current providers who are feeling threatened?
In the late 90s, when this took off, and we have some people in the audience, I think, who are probably better equipped to talk about that than even me, there were communities that were $20 all you can eat cable TV and real effort to lock in. You have a lot of apartments in Ames. The staff report did an excellent job of laying out I think there's one private provider who goes after those. You may see the other providers going in and trying to lock those up into long-term contracts. This is a multi-year build if you would want to do it. And by the time you get there, that whole swath of the marketplace could be off the table. So it's a difficult decision. It can be done. It can be really good for a lot of communities. And it's just really about what's right for yours.
Okay. Thank you, Troy. Ben Schmidt.
Mr. Mayor, Council, thanks for listening. I wanted to do a quick audience poll. Can anyone raise their hand if you're here for an internet service that should be as fast and reliable as light and power? Okay, thank you. So my name is Ben Schmidt. I live at 1035 Vermont Court in beautiful West Ames. Member of a local group called Ames Community Internet Initiative and a local resource on internet technologies. I formerly led technical information security at TDS Telecom. I led security globally at Danfoss, and I now am the Vice President of Information Security at DeWalla. I'd like to begin with commending Council for the creation of the report. It addresses many concerns that those of us in the room have voiced, and it's really based on the opportunity to provide better service that's reliable, affordable, and accessible by all. So my comments are based on 3 different hats that I wear: an Ames resident, a father, and a technology leader. As an Ames resident, I want the city to thrive through growth and economic development. Those moving to Ames shouldn't have to restrict their house searches as a function of weak or unavailable broadband internet access. I also want choices. I have one viable choice in my residence, as my second choice offered me 1.5 megabits. That's the same speed I was offered 20 years ago in college in off-campus housing in Madison, Wisconsin. Robust internet that is reliable, affordable, and accessible by all will be a huge improvement to existing prospective residents and businesses. As a father, I want reliable and cost-effective internet access for my family and the classmates of my children. While we are happy to help our children's classmates without internet access through guest Wi-Fi at our home, it's regrettable in 2018 that we're often compelled to do so. And lastly, as the Vice President of Information Security at DeWalla, I help to lead teams solving difficult problems that enable businesses to connect to U.S. banking infrastructure. Formerly at Danfoss and in alignment with friends at Workiva, I can share the requirement of remote productivity tools. Think of Iowa winters as being one impediment to being safe. 24/7 support for our customers and reliable bandwidth to participate in immersive meetings through telepresence. At Danfoss in particular, budgeting with telepresence is very important. To attract and retain badly needed talent to this area, internet access is a non-negotiable service required for those looking to join our teams. We need additional data to drive this initiative. As my engineering colleagues at work would say, this is a solved technical problem. To that end, I sincerely hope Council continues this initiative progress in the next step of a feasibility study. Based on other successful initiatives in the space, I'm confident a technical solution that matches the requirements of the City of Ames exists, and this solution can be achieved without taxpayer impact, as subscribers can and have successfully driven this model before. I thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you, Ben. Next is Caleb Keller.
I am Caleb Keller. I live at 1214 Truman Place here in Ames. I want to speak in support of the feasibility study for a retail model. I got online, the first time I went online was 1993, and I didn't even know what to do on the internet because it was a luxury in 93. 25 years later in 2018, it's not a luxury. It's a necessity of modern life. I mean, it's everywhere. It's in every facet of our lives. And if that sounds like hyperbole, just think about what you've done today that required the internet. Did you pay a bill or go on Facebook? Did you email a colleague or read the news, or heck, did you look up directions to this building? All of that is on the internet now. And as a way of illustrating that, I wanted to tell you a story about a young lady I know named Lily. She's a freshman at Ames High. And like all freshmen, she got a Chromebook because at Ames High, technology and the internet is integral to the educational process. But The problem is that she doesn't have internet at home because her mom can't afford it. So the assignments that she would receive through the internet, the research that she would do, the handing in of those assignments has to be done in 2-3 hour chunks that she spends at houses of people that her mom goes to church with. So her mom has to take time out to drive her to those places. And if she can't get 100% of her high school related internet work done in those 6 hours, she is just out of luck. Which means that her education is being qualitatively damaged by the fact that her mom can't afford the internet. And that's not her fault. That means her educational future is being qualitatively damaged and her potential life prospects are being damaged through no fault of her own, just because there's a barrier existing between her and the internet. Now, we don't want barriers between Ames residents and running water or electricity, because those are necessities of modern life. And we shouldn't have, in my opinion, we shouldn't have unnecessary barriers between Ames residents and the internet, because that too is a necessity of modern life. And in virtue of that, I think that the retail option is the best option to reduce or to eliminate those barriers. Thank you.
I have one follow-up question. I apologize. I won't ask questions of everyone. Shoot. But on this issue, because I think a lot of people are interested in this, even in the retail model, the goal is not to provide free internet.
Sure.
There would be some fee.
Yeah.
So it might be that the fee that we would be charging would be commensurate with the charges that are currently being charged.
It's possible.
So
Sure.
I love the story of Lily, and I think everyone in the room wants Lily to be successful.
Sure.
But I want to make sure we tease out that the retail model doesn't necessarily mean that her mom's going to have any more ability to pay for that. Do you have a response on that?
Yeah, so I say that for the simple reason that a utility that Ames would provide to its residents would have one bottom line mission, which would be to provide quality internet to the residents of Ames. Its bottom line mission would not be to enrich the shareholders of the company. And I think that the for-profit model introduces a profit motive, which potentially undercuts the ability to provide accessible internet to everybody. And we wouldn't have that standing between us and the residents of Ames in a retail
The
model.
challenge is going to be just on issues of scale.
Sure.
So we have little baby model and they have big models, and so they can spread costs out over a much larger base. So thanks for your time on that. It's an important point to tease out. Thank you.
Thanks, Caleb. Curtis Dean.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Curtis Dean, and I live in Grimes, Iowa. My address there is 517 Southeast 17th Street. I'm here as a longtime participant in municipal telecommunications. I'm now an independent consultant, and I'm also one of the co-founders of an organization called the Community Broadband Action Network, which is designed to help communities identify and solve for better broadband. Just one thing I do want to clarify that was mentioned earlier in response to the discussion about where the electric utility is and isn't within the city of Ames. Just to clarify, if you were to have a referendum and you have legal authority under Iowa law then to operate a utility, you have the legal authority to operate that utility throughout your city boundaries, not just your electric utility boundaries. It just may be that joint trenching or anything like that couldn't happen within that, but you would still have the legal authority to serve people that are in the city limits outside of the electric service territory. So I want to mention that the scorched earth policy that Troy referred to, I am a survivor of that scorched earth policy because I got my start in Spencer, Iowa in 1997 when we were building a telecommunications network, and we experienced those extreme levels of competitive pressure from the existing incumbent providers. We fought through those, we thrived and survived, and within 5 years, we had about 70% of all customers in the community hooked to our network. Right now, in addition to the communities in Iowa that already have telecommunications, the 25 or so that Troy mentioned, there are a number that are in the process of strongly evaluating those. New Hampton, Charles City, and Vinton, Iowa are all right now in the process of doing the actual design and engineering and are expected to go to bids and start building networks next year. Pella is another community that is studying very seriously. I've gone to talk to a number of councils and utility boards over the years, and just citizen groups like some of the advocates you have here. What I always tell people is the elements of better broadband, the elements of excellence when it comes to broadband. I think it comes down to 5 elements. Number 1, it should be fast. It should be reliable. It should be universally available. In other words, no haves and have-nots. Everybody's a have that can access the network. It should be affordable, although each community is going to have to wrestle with the definition of affordable, because some people would say affordable is 0. I can't afford anything. So then it becomes but the community gets to decide that. And finally, that provider should provide excellence in customer service and how they treat the people that pay the bills. I think that if a community feels that it doesn't tick off each one of those 5 elements, then it probably is not getting the type of excellence in broadband that a community needs to thrive and survive in the 21st century. And that's why, in addition to those 25, we see so many communities right now that are sitting in rooms just like you are today, and they're trying to figure out, how do we do something about this? You'll get to make that decision on your own, whether it's you deciding to do a retail model, work with existing providers, attract a new provider into town. You get to decide that, and that's really what it all comes down to. Local people making local decisions based on local interests, not a private company making private decisions based on private interest. So, thank you.
Thank you. And John Wilson.
I just filled that out there because I thought everybody was going to.
Okay, very good. Is there anybody else that wishes to address council? Please bring an orange card with you that's filled out. Okay, all right. Let's do this. Once you, in the interest of time, come on up and offer your comment, introduce yourself, your name and your address, and then fill one out afterwards, please.
Okay.
And get to Sheik, please.
My name is Carolyn Myers. It's spelled Myers. I live at 1804 Maxwell Avenue in Ames. I have 2 comments. I wanted to address Councilman Garten about his comment about not knowing whether or not it would still be affordable for this family. Obviously, we wouldn't know that, but until we do a feasibility study, we won't know anything. So I encourage you to at least consider a feasibility study for that reason. Secondly, something that has not been brought up that I'm sure might be on your minds, but the other interest for having the public municipality for the broadband internet is that we would be able to control net neutrality for the city. There wouldn't be Mediacom or any other company deciding what access to what sites on what website we could have. This would be completely nonprofit run by the city. And I think that's a real positive thing. Local control.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Bo Hicks. I live at 129 Main, number 3 here in downtown Ames, and I represent Mediacom. I know some of the faces in the audience. I'm the area director. I come here not so much representing the big company. I come here representing 40 head of household jobs, 225 South Dayton, that come to work 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. There's a small outage in Boone right now, and I've got 2 guys, one that lives in North Ames, and they're both out there working, and they'll work through the night in the cold to try to get the internet back up, because we know I have 3 teenagers, one close to teenage. So I have more gray hair, and I hear internet. You know, what I used to think of as a cable coming in that provided the Bozo the Clown show when I was a kid on WGN. My kids now look at that and say, that's fast internet. I understand when it goes down at home and I'm working from home or my wife is.
Bo, would you please address the
I'm
council?
sorry.
Not
It's
public.
like, what are we doing? You know, what's happening? Our life ceases to function. Same thing when the kids come home and have to do their homework. So I understand that. And I want everyone to understand as a resident, I certainly see the frustrations. on behalf of MediaCom, I think when we first spoke, me and some associates with the group, we felt it was going to be an ongoing conversation, is kind of what we had hoped. I did give the council and the mayor a map today of our node coverage that shows where each of our nodes go out here in town. And just want to clarify that we do have a fiber system in town. Ames is a very fiber-rich community, not just with MediaCom. And that fiber then feeds our coax cable systems that go to the home. So in some areas, for example, 20 homes are fed from one fiber node. Especially you talk about utilization, that's something we never hit 80% utilization in Ames now, because we've divided so many nodes with more fiber, because when the student population comes back in. Affordability is something I hear a lot. I will say we do have a program called Connect to Compete. If people haven't heard that, the schools have the information on it. I have the information on it. It's online. It's $9.95 a month. If you qualify for reduced or free lunch, you qualify for that program if you're in K through 12th grade. $9.95 a month is just 10 meg, but it's enough to do your homework. It may not be enough to 4K stream Netflix, but you can do your homework. So I am here for an open conversation. We want to be a partner with the city. We've said this for a few years now. I've been up here before and said, even if it was a bi-weekly meeting with the city or with city staff where we sit and bring it on and we go and we try to meet these challenges here in town and do the best we can to provide 1 gig service for everyone in the community that wants that service. So that's what I had this evening.
All right, thank you.
So, Bo, if I could, first of all, thank you for being willing to come. I think it's noteworthy that CenturyLink didn't send anyone, and you're here tonight, and so thank you for being willing to do that. Can I, for a moment, sort of channel all of them to you? Right?
Okay.
So, I mean, we're having this meeting today because of them, and just for fun, I printed off all of the emails I received about this issue. This is them right here. And so a lot of public input. So you've had a chance to hear some people, and just people's presence, I think, here really represents a level of frustration. What should we do? And we've got some options. Could you speak to them and speak to us in terms of possible directions?
My preference is that he speaks to us, not to the council.
Well, I mean, metaphorically.
How to say this? As a company, we're in a lot of these communities that have done this, are talking about this. Pella, Vinton, Cedar Falls. We compete with them daily. However, I think first, as a taxpayer in town, I would, if I don't like the prices at Hy-Vee or Fairway, I don't really think I have to have milk. I don't think that you should get in that business. That's my personal opinion, but I'm a very liberal person, believe it or not. So personally, it's a struggle for me because I do believe everyone should have access to internet today. But if you work with us, if there's areas we're not serving, but we are a private company, we don't take any taxpayer money, none. When we did downtown Ames, people had talked about it for years. I came into town, took over the directorship here, and our owner said, "What's it going to cost?" And it went from $200,000 to $500,000 because of what we had to go through down there. But we did it. Now, 60% of the buildings now have our service in them. 40% didn't even sign ROEs, which are right of entries, that allow tenants like myself to get our internet service. And so that's also a struggle in town in some places and some developments. So maybe that's a model that the city works on to make sure that developments have, I recall one down off Bobcat, there's a development that we're in. However, we were brought in late and the requirements of what type of wiring were to be put in the building nowhere met our needs or any of our competitors' needs. That building had to be completely rewired, but that wasn't part of, I don't know if it still is, like part of the city. When you go in and say you need these specs, maybe that's something as well. One of the check marks Mills County down in Glenwood area. We've met with their economic development team, and one thing they're doing, and some areas in West Des Moines and Waukee are doing, which I think is good, and it doesn't matter if it's Mediacom or whoever, but they're looking at development areas and saying, here's the boxes that have to be checked, and one of them is high-speed internet available here? And it's not just me saying, yes, it is. It's me saying, yes, that address is Mediacom giving you something, or saying, it is, and it would cost this much, though, to get it there. Because there is a little difference between saying that a certain house is serviceable and are we going to charge you to bring service to that house? And I fully admit that there is that comes up once in a while. So that could be something.
3 years, 5 years from now, are we in the same spot?
Most of Ames, the map I showed you today, is serviceable. West Ames is a challenge. There's some areas over there. My chiropractor, or Mark, he has this at his business, but we were just talking about his house. They have a beautiful home in West Ames, and they can't get us there. Luckily, there's another provider that has some fiber there, but those were huge lots built out. Our ROI nowhere met return to go out there and run fiber or coax to all of those homes. Now, we do have some subdivisions up north, some very nice large lots where owner contribution came into play. They said, we want 1 gig internet. Here's a check, come out and do it. And I realize not everyone can do that. I couldn't. But that's what some people do. So some people want it that bad that they'll do that. But I would rather work with the city, I think Mediacom would, and say, where are the issues, number one? Because if there are parts of town we say we serve and you can't get a gig of internet, we need to see. Now, getting a gig of internet requires you have a computer or devices that can get a gig, number one, because my Chromebook is the closest thing that I have that'll get it. But there's a lot of moving pieces. And, I just looked today, we ran 16 trouble calls in the city of Ames today. 16. So 16 people had trouble today, take that times 30. That is a lot of people that probably have a gripe. But I have 2 of these things, and when I drive to Mills County, neither one of them work, and I pay a lot more than I do for my Mediacom bill on these 2 things. So I get it. I really do. And we're here to work with whoever we can and try to help resolve issues. We are local. We do have a lot of local people we employ, and that's why I'm here.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Could I ask a couple of questions?
Ben.
I'm really quite confused now because you said multiple times how much you'd rather work with the city. But the city asked you for this information about your coverage months ago and asked you repeatedly to provide that information. That's my understanding.
Well, I felt like
you sent it to us today, to the city and council, not to the staff. And I can't even understand what the diagram is.
Okay.
Can we see them? Do you have? I left a copy down there. Can you see the map that we're talking about? Because maybe you can at least just tell us what's on this map.
Yeah, and I thought the city had this map back in July 17th. So I apologize that I'll take that responsibility. That must have been our error that it didn't get out. But this is the map that we originally had sent.
Okay, so I don't see a legend here, and actually it's kind of too small. There's a blown up version. Can you show us the blown up version? There, that's what you sent us.
Yeah.
Where is that?
Okay.
It is.
Well, okay, I'm going to say that's a little extreme because what I sent, I could read streets on it. It is smaller, but could tell you where streets are. What it is, if you go back to the other one,
Go
it's
back to
not
the other one. Sure.
distorted,
I mean,
please.
this is. I just tried blowing up a section of this map just
So it shows, this is the university. I left the university off, and part of the economic development park, we serve those areas as well, but on a joint venture with ISU. And then there's West Ames, North Ames, and you can see the area.
I see the shape of Ames. Are you saying that everything red is something that could get service tomorrow?
You betcha.
Your whole spectrum of all of your
To a gig of
offerings?
internet. And if it doesn't, then we need to know because there's a problem there.
Oh, and if it doesn't, then maybe it doesn't.
No. I'm telling you, if it doesn't, tell me where and we'll go see why. But it certainly should. Everyone in red, everyone that's a Mediacom customer can get up to a gig of internet if they're in-house situations, right, too. So what we can get it to the modem and test it. If we can't test it at the modem and get those speeds, then there's an issue and we need to work on it.
And so this also shows to people who have contributed money to have build-outs to their neighborhood, or are these to people who could contribute in order to have build-outs to their neighborhood?
Yeah, it includes both. This is everybody as of Well, this is the updated one, but this is everyone right now that has service from a node. So these are our node boundaries that we have. You can see like there in West Ames off the old school road there. If you go up, there's some of the gaps that we have that I admittedly will tell you we do have there. The one I was referring to earlier from my chiropractors out there, I think.
Thank you.
Uh-huh. Thank you. Thank you.
Is anybody else before I close public input?
Hi, I don't have an orange card.
If you introduce
I'll get
yourself,
one.
and then if you want to fill one out afterwards, then please.
Yeah. Hi, my name is Brian Worth. I live at 3515 Emerald Drive. I'm the chair for the group of Ames Community Internet Initiative. And I wasn't sure if I was going to speak because I'm not really great at this public speaking and I'm pretty nervous at this point in time, but I really felt that there was a need for me to come up and kind of, let's talk about a few of the things that I heard that was mentioned throughout the night. I know that you mentioned that there's the concern that the price might be the same. Councilman Garten, you mentioned that. And one of the things that I think Troy mentioned was that just by starting this process, we improved the internet. And I think part of that process is going to be lowering the cost overall. I mean, just by us saying, hey, we may want to compete with you guys, they're going to step up their game to try and improve things, which is going to lower the cost, which is going to make it more accessible, more feasible for those people who don't have the internet now to try and get that. The other thing that I want to mention is that you heard him talk about what area can we fix? What can we fix? What can we do to fix that? And I think the city report, and they talked about that there isn't one area. You can't just go in and fix one area. And I think all these people here and all the emails that you have gotten have said it's everywhere. There are issues on every street, everywhere in Ames. Some people have great internet, but their neighbor has terrible internet. Some people have average. It's just all across the board. So it's not going to be, okay, you guys having a great discussion and here's one area. Okay, let's go in and fix this and problem solved. This is something that's ubiquitous throughout all of Ames. It is a problem that everybody or, majority of people are having this problem. And so I hope that you guys take all of that into consideration when you're looking at to what you can possibly do. And the other thing is that the technology, the fiber optics, why would we settle for having fiber optics that lead into an outdated coaxial cable? Let's get fiber to home. I mean, that's a great way to go. That's where so many cities are going towards. They make gigabyte speeds easy to go to the homes. That 100 megabytes to the home is their lowest speed that they're going to offer you. All right? There is no 25 megabytes or anything like that. When you look at these other cities in Iowa, that's what they're offering that are doing this. When you look about these cities across the country, that's what they're offering. Numerous reports say that when you do this, you lower the cost. So we're going to we have the potential to lower the cost. We have the potential to provide reliable service. So this is a great infrastructure project that the city of Ames can do that would benefit so many people. And the best part about it, the part that works out the greatest is there is that chance, I wouldn't even say chance, there is more than likely that it's not going to cost the city of Ames people any tax money. So let's pursue it. Let's look into it. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian.
Hello, council. My name is David Maddox. I live 724 Duff Avenue, right there, a couple blocks north of Bench Hill Park. I moved to Ames about 5 years ago. I lived on the west side. I lived in an apartment. We only had cable access. There was no phone line driven into the house. We talked to the landlord, said, let's get a different option because the only internet that we could get was going out every other night. Didn't happen. So now I'm living at a new place and I only have a phone line because there's no cable run to the house. So that 1.5 megabit connection, you'd be surprised what you can do with it. I think that the focus groups might want to start also looking at what methods of delivery are available, because you can easily expand out using wireless networks as opposed to running things along a grid directly into a building. And I think that's really highlighted just by the difference of what was available and what is available in different parts of the city.
Okay, thank you.
Chuck Winkleblack, Hunziker Companies, 105 South 16th Street. My interest on this is when you read through the report and it gets to the developers part of this, but I also obviously need and use the internet. But this has changed a bunch in the 20 some years I've been doing this, where we used to, when we lay out a subdivision, as we do, one of the first things we have to do is contact all of the city of Ames and the gas company and all of those, including Mediacom, CenturyLink. And they would be in there and they would want a copy of our plat and they would want to know when we're going to do it, what's our timeline, when's our first house going to get done. And we don't even get a phone call back a lot of times. So we haven't put most of those in our subdivisions and our new subdivisions the past probably 5 years or so. And I've not met this gentleman, but it's frustrating, and we have lost house sales for people to say, what do you have for internet service? And we've tried to do cost sharing things and say, what do we have to do to provide internet? And sometimes it's a combination of the decision isn't made locally, can't deal with that, we don't know who, gets kicked up someplace else. Because we do that, like with the gas company and other things where we have to front things and then we get revenue share back until our investment's paid back. So it's not like that's a foreign concept to us. Like our gas company, when they put their lines in, we have to front. We're paying them to put the infrastructure in, but then we get our money back up to what we've paid. It's not an ongoing source. But again, we can't get them to even provide, and we're tickled to death when somebody will get back to us and say, oh my God, we can provide something, because we have different times where we're stuck with nothing. So we have brand new houses where we're struggling to get anybody. CenturyLink did a deal a couple years ago where they put, and I am not a techie person, but they put fiber in. And so we have some places where we have fiber and it's fantastic and the people love it. And they have people that are a block away that can't get the service. And so it's extremely frustrating for the people in the neighborhoods to say, I've got awesome service and fiber. But my point is, we'll do what we need to, because it is becoming, an essential service. And we would love to work with whoever, whether it's the city or, again, my preference as a private business type person would be that the city not get involved in it. But if we need to make it happen somehow, some way, we just need to find a way to provide. For us to put a conduit in the ground as we're going there is not a big deal if you're doing it up front. It does add to the cost of the house, but not significantly. But our challenge is we put that in, and if there's nothing to hook it to on the other end, or we hear from Mediacom or CenturyLink, well, that's great, but all I have is a copper wire there. So you run the fiber all you want to, but what's coming in through this copper wire doesn't do anything. And then they say, we have no plans to upgrade that. No. So it's an issue. We'd like to help be a part of the solution, and we'll work with whoever to be able to provide internet service to our customers, because again, we feel like it is a pretty essential service, and will be even more so going forward. Thanks.
One question, Chuck. So in the audience tonight, there are a few friends of mine that are exactly in the target audience that we're trying to attract to Ames. They're smart, they have advanced education, they're doing really interesting work here in Ames. We're trying to attract millennials to the community. I know you do focus groups and things with your efforts to try to market your properties. Could you help us think through, just a little more detail about the importance of internet for that particular target group?
And only anecdotally from when we did it, when we do our apartment projects, because those are the folks that tend to be want the faster speeds, wants to do that. And it's in the top 2 to 3 things or they won't, even with the apartments that we own and manage through town, that is one of the first questions that's asked is, what speed do you have? The ups, the downs. Again, I can't really talk intelligently about that, but it's, again, from when we did our focus groups, again, for the apartment project we did out west there at Village Park, we worked almost a year and a half ahead of time with the folks to say, this is coming, we've got people here, and we were praying that, the week before, we had people moving in that we had internet service, and that's trying a year and a half out in front of that. So, but because people were like, look, if you don't have good internet, we're not gonna sign a lease here until you give us some assurances that you're gonna have it. So,
Yeah, that's a good data point. We need to think about that. Thank you.
Thanks, Chuck.
Chuck, do you notice any difference between the multifamily residential and the single-family residential when it comes to trying to get connected?
as far as, I'm not sure I understand the question.
Well, the focus groups that you were running were for apartment complexes, yes?
Yeah.
So what we have seen in the staff report is that many of the apartment complexes in town are served by a different company than most people are getting in their single-family homes. And so you were talking about the difficulty of getting residences, single-family residences hooked up, getting people in to put in the fiber or whatever was needed to connect the home to the lit part of the system. So do you have that same problem getting somebody to come into a multifamily complex that you have for individual single-family homes?
In some instances, yes. And that's where, again, we get bounced around and say, well, we've used up our construction budget or construction allocation for this year, or next year, or whatever. The appeal that we have, and again, it's a math exercise for all of them when you talk about their ROI, if they have, for instance, one of our subdivisions may have 250 houses in it that will build out over 7 or 8 or 10 years. Or if I tell somebody we're going to have 300 apartment units that you'll probably be getting 2 or 3 checks from in total. So you're going to have 300 users times however many dollars per month that's going to be broken down with just in a couple. Those are the ones that, and I'm not blaming them for that, but if I can have 300 people that I only have to send 2 or 3 bills out for, that's much more appealing than a subdivision where I have lots of runs and, they may or may not choose our service, or they may or may not have, and again, the people that pay or can pay are sometimes anyways, people that have to have them for their particular business, whether it's a doctor that needs to read an x-ray right away, or somebody that's running an internet business out of their house, or whatever that might be. And so they have some cost sharing things where their employer may pay, or it's just a necessity, a cost of doing business that they have to have it, or they can't operate whatever business that they're trying to do.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
My name is Bob Haug, 3517 Oakland Street in Ames. I hadn't intended to speak, and I rise only to clarify or further clarify the issue of cross subsidies that came up earlier. I was the executive director of the Municipal Utility Association for 27 years. I retired 4 years ago when Troy came in. But I was involved in negotiating the the limitations on cross subsidies. And I want you to know that they apply only to the ongoing operating expenses of the telecommunications utility. And at any time, the electric utility or the city generally can provide funding for capital expenses. So I think that's an important distinction. When Cedar Falls got in the business, that was many years ago, because they were one of the first, they covered capital costs through the issuance of both revenue bonds and general obligation bonds. Once the telecom utility was up and running, they took out the GO bonds, but those options are still available. And I just didn't want to leave anyone with the impression that somehow cities that got into this in the 1990s were somehow grandfathered into to situations. Those same restrictions on non-cross subsidies for the ongoing operating expenses apply to all telecom utilities, new and old, the new unis and the old ones. So that's just a point of clarification.
Thanks. Thank you, Bob. Anybody else?
Kelly Jungi, 1935 Paulson Drive. I just know of a few towns that are less than, 1,200 people that have fiber to the house, and it's profitable. They're surviving. Sanborn, Iowa, that's where my parents are. Stanhope, they have fiber to the house. Colo, $50 a month for 50 megabytes. I'm paying $60 for up to 60 megabytes, and it's never 60. I'm lucky if I get 8. So when he says there's 1 gig to every house in Ames, there's no chance. I appreciated his job, but that's a lie.
Anybody else? Seeing none, we'll close public input and council.
Mayor, if I could show some graphs based on some experiments that I did, I'd appreciate that. I'd just like to give you some background here. This is just my experience. I'm a former computer science professor, and I used to teach networking and security. And I was trying to figure out what explains at least some of the disparity we see between some people reporting, oh, my service is great, it's fine, it works all the time, and other people who are saying that it's really unreliable and I can't live with it anymore. So what I'm showing here, this is a graph that I made. Well, first, the infrastructure to build this sort of thing doesn't really exist out of the box. You don't get it at Best Buy. So I kind of had to put some things together to do these measurements. But this shows a speed measurement from my house using my cable internet over to a neighbor's house. And it shows 1 day of that with midnight on the left and midnight on the right in 15-minute increments. And all I want you to see here is that it's pretty consistent throughout the day. There's a dip there around 7 p.m. Okay, but otherwise it's really quite consistent throughout the day. This is good service. But that is not what I always get. Can you show slide 2, please? So this is slide 2. This is a more typical day. And you can draw a couple of conclusions from this. First, there's a period sort of in the early morning where it's pretty good, or in the mid-morning, I guess that is, where it's pretty good, the block in the middle. But there's much of the day where it's up and down, right next to each other, up and down in 15-minute increments. And one thing that this won't stop you from doing is sending email or shopping on Amazon or those sorts of activities that aren't very demanding in terms of bandwidth and latency and error, right? You won't even notice this if that's what you use your internet for. This is a reason that you might have this sort of service and say, it's great, works fine for me. But if you're trying to do video conferencing with a prospective client, or you're trying to just do an ordinary telephone call using voice over IP, then those dips will kill you. They'll kill your connection, or they'll jitter to the point where you get embarrassed and you have to hang up. Or if you're doing day trading, then you might be losing losing a transaction. And again, so look, we have the spikes right next to the dips. That means that by the time you notice something is going on, and you try to call in a trouble report, it's working again, right? And so if you call it in and you say, please help me out here, and no one, and they say, well, okay, call me when you have a problem, it's very unpredictable. And this isn't data that I can see anyone sort of tracking on a household by household basis to help us understand the type of network quality that we're getting. I started making these measurements on a daily basis 8 months ago. And so I've seen a number of days that are like this, and there are some other days that are like the previous slide too. But I just wanted to give you an idea that different people can look at the same situation and see very different things. And this is what I'm dealing with. And I know there's a technical solution one day. I'll continue working on it. Customer support has been very polite. But when I show this information to someone, they're like, wow, I didn't know it was like this. So this is why calling in a trouble support doesn't always solve your problem, and it might explain why calling in a trouble report might get tiresome after a while when it doesn't really do anything. So that's my experience. I thought it would be interesting for council to take a look at that.
Cool charts, David.
Thanks. I know you like data, Tim.
Yeah.
And I guess I had one other question for the staff table in terms of the map that we asked for, and then I guess we just received today. You asked for that many times, right? Isn't that true?
We asked for it initially in the June meeting, and we had some staff from the GIS contingent at the city to offer up any technical expertise so that we could get the level of detail that we were hoping to get.
Is that what we got today is not exactly what you had asked for?
I don't think it matches exactly the level of detail we were asking for.
Okay.
And then Dwayne had some follow-up.
Yeah, I had
with
some
the
follow-up
providers.
emails, and we actually open it up to them. I mean, they could certainly provide the map. That's something we wanted, but we also said, and any other input that you feel would be helpful to this report, we were glad. As Brian mentioned, the report, they're the big providers in town, so obviously a report on internet should include their input, but we were unable to get anything. So we did final call at least twice. And we didn't hear back.
Okay. Steve, thanks for the chart.
Sure.
Steve, could you help us start thinking about just wrapping our brain around the cost of a feasibility study? I mean, if a feasibility study was $20, we just do it, right? But could you give us a sense of what's something like this? You have a
First of all, if you want, it's like you did with the traffic study. I think if you want us to explore that, we should go out and talk to some companies. And our feasibility study is probably going to cost more than it did in Stanhope. So, I mean, it's going to be in excess of $100,000, I would guess. I haven't talked to anybody. Could it cost as much as $150,000? I don't know. I think if you want us to explore that, we need to find out, first of all, think of the scope we're looking for, and then get a better idea of the cost. But I wouldn't be surprised if it's more than $100,000, I would think.
That's not for all four, though.
Well, that'd be studying one of the models.
Studying one of the
That'd be
models.
studying the retail model. I'm sorry, I'm thinking about the retail model.
Yeah.
The most sophisticated analysis will have to be done there, I would think.
If you wanted more than one model study.
Yeah, I don't know if you should even do that, but some will need feasibility studies, perhaps. I don't know. And then we'd have to layer it into the budget. We'd bring it back into budget time for you.
I have just some other technical questions, maybe Steve, for you. We understand the utilities that we have. So the idea of adding another utility to our components, could you help us think through what that means in terms of physical infrastructure, staffing?
Yeah. This is not something you just layer on and say, do it with existing staff. So if you're going to commit to this, I hope you give us first-class equipment and first-class staff. So we'll need another place to operate out of. So we'll need a building for offices, but also we'd have to hire technicians. You see those technicians that are out there, perhaps. I don't know if we can contract with them. Let's assume we have to buy them and vehicles to go along with them. So it would take a staff, and we'd have to work with an expert to tell us what it would take to staff, this type of operation. I mean, think of what we do for water and sewer and electric. It's a lot of public contact. People want 24-hour service. It's like we'll have unionized labor on call, in the middle of the night to respond, 24-hour service. And you want to make sure, we think it through is what I'm saying, but we're not going to give it to one department and say, use it with your existing staff. That's why we'll work with them to see what our actual manpower needs are and also our equipment needs. You've got your capital needs also, but you have your operational capital needs too. That's what we have to build in the feasibility study. And it'll be complex, but it's not going to be something you just say, take it over Public Works, take it over electric. It won't be that. It'll probably be a separate utility.
You can't do that, Don?
No, sir.
No? Okay.
But that is something that the feasibility study
Sure,
would be
that's what we do.
expected
That's what we do.
to disclose.
And we work with them on it too.
I'll mention also.
We have to
that-
give them the labor costs. As far as customer service, it'd probably remain in finance, but they'd have to expand their staff to handle it, so it'd be expansion in different areas.
And I just add also that building out a new network would probably require a burst of contractor activity in order to do things simultaneously. Not necessarily people you need to keep on staff in the long term, but people that you need in order to build things out rapidly.
Yeah, and rapidly is a relative term.
Of course.
There's a lot of upfront costs where we don't have enough fiber in place to have the number of customers we need to generate the revenue. So we have to figure out the cash flow and all that stuff too.
So would it be worthwhile, John, to think through what we agree to? Because I think there's probably consensus in this room and on the dais that we don't like having this conversation, that we want this to be right. And we feel like we need to get it right. I'm concerned about the students. I'm concerned about the millennials. We have a high-tech workforce, and they're very unhappy with the quality of internet. I think if we agree, the end is the same for everyone in the room. Really, the question is, what is the means to the end?
Right.
Is that sort of a fair presumption? I mean, is anyone really happy with having a room full of disgruntled citizens? I mean, your point, Brian, about the data, even though this wasn't a statistically significant survey, there were 700 people who jumped in. We can't get 7 people normally, to do an online survey. So even though they were self-selecting, there were 700 people that were self-selecting. I think we need to notice that.
So Steve, you said you weren't sure whether investigating more than one model made sense, but given all of the costs of establishing a utility and us not knowing exactly what those costs are, how do we compare that to another model to make some sort of informed decision if we don't investigate?
What I meant is you can investigate all models. Some models may not need a highly sophisticated feasibility study.
Okay.
In other words, if you told us we're going to do the aggregation model, that would be staff maybe starting out and seeing, does the school district, the university, are there partners out there?
Mhm.
You could hire somebody to do that, but that's something we could start doing.
Okay.
There's a hybrid in there, like the Davenport model, and I haven't studied that yet. But that may be just sending our staff over to talk to Bettendorf. I think it was Bettendorf.
Bettendorf and Davenport.
And Davenport. I mean, there's some first steps. I just the retail model, when you're going to invest it all, you're the lone person in there. There's no other partner. There's a lot of, the feasibility study is very critical there. So I wanted to make a distinction between investigating different models and doing a sophisticated, costly financial analysis on it. That may be a second step on all of them, but you can investigate more than one model. Does that help you in try to distinguish between what I was saying?
Yeah.
I think some of the models that would require a utility might be compatible and might be able to investigate at the same time in a feasibility study. But like you say, some of them are just a different thing altogether.
Yeah.
I'm ready to make a motion.
So maybe Tim asked for some clarification. I guess this may tie into your motion, David, but it seemed like the first thing council needs to determine is, are you interested in 1, 2, 3, or all 4 of these models being investigated, or is there 1 or 2 that you just say, no, we don't even want to, consider? If all 4 on the table, that would be the first decision I would think you'd make, and then after that, then it'd be basically you want to do a feasibility study and what can be done in-house and what can be done via a consultant, and then let staff start looking into the costs and maybe a direction on that as outlined on page 11 of the council action form. And then we can go back and look at there's 3 policy things he also suggested as well too. Anyway, so that was my thinking, but David, if you're prepared to.
Yeah, I am. And it combines a feasibility study with a staff report. So let me just say it. I'd move to bring us an agenda item with cost estimates for a feasibility study covering the retail and wholesale models, and a staff report with more information on the community ownership and deployment model, including results of reaching out to Iowa State, the DOT, Mary Greeley, Ames and Gilbert School Districts, and COLO.
I'll second.
So I would like to do that, but I have an intermediate step that I would like to interpose before this. So normally when we go through the process of going through the cost of a feasibility study, we've done all the due diligence that we can internally, and then we pull the trigger on the feasibility study. What's very, very difficult about this issue for me is just how elusive trying to wrap our brain, this goes to your point, Brian, trying to wrap our brain around the scope of that gap. And so what I would like to suggest as an alternative first step is before we spend conservatively $100,000, I would like to direct Steve to pursue sort of a last chance dialogue. I don't know whether to be optimistic about that or not. I appreciate the fact that MediaCom, Bo, you came tonight. Thank you. You're a rock star for doing that. I don't know whether to be optimistic or pessimistic given where we are today. When we had that workshop, you weren't on the council at the time. I thought
I was watching though.
You're watching?
Yes, I was.
Yeah, cool. Thanks for doing that. But I left there thinking maybe we'd see some forward progress. I don't know that we have. So, but because of the price tag of the feasibility study, I think it makes sense to have sort of a last ditch effort and have Steve directly reach out to them. And if it turns out that it's an unprofitable conversation, then we go forward with the feasibility study. I'm all in. But in the event he's able to bring back something for us to consider, we may save the taxpayers $100,000, $150,000 on a feasibility study.
Well, to be fair, though, David's motion wasn't to pull the trigger on a feasibility study. It was to give us the price tag. Right? So David's motion was not to proceed with a feasibility study, right? It was for staff to bring us back the price tag and some possible scopes for the feasibility study.
Okay, thanks for clarifying
Which
that.
I think, I mean, if we were saying, yes, today, go ahead with the.
I'd vote against that too.
Yeah, exactly. No, I don't know. But I need to know the price tag and I mean, so.
Yeah.
So that could happen in parallel, Tim.
It could.
Yeah.
And so I'd be supportive of that motion. If it's just a matter of figuring out what the price tag is, that's part of making a good decision.
It was the price tag and
Thanks for
a
clarifying.
staff report on with more information on the community ownership and deployment model, reaching out to potential partners. Staff report on that. So both just information gathering.
I guess my only concern at this point is it leaves out the option for us to figure out ways to partner with existing providers.
We could have a second motion though.
And
You could have a staff report and then have a second motion that would basically be, you're getting that parallel with the, with reaching out to.
Because I'll make a follow-up motion
Okay.
to that very effect.
And it might be that the feasibility study is out of our price range or something, and then we would pursue with those others.
At least
But we
you're
just
getting-
don't know the cost. So.
At least you're making some positive action both ways, or at least getting information back. And then you have that. Then you have that information. If you're not making any progress with the other one, you at least have that data information to know what to do.
That's right. And I think that's what we heard clearly from staff is that we know there's a problem, but we just don't have the numbers to figure it out. We don't know what the potential subscriber base would be. We don't know exactly what the infrastructure costs would be. There's a lot to figure out.
Any other discussion? Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Any other motions?
So before I try this motion, Steve, could you help clarify the kinds of direction that would be helpful to you? So would I move that we direct staff to reach out to, and Chris, maybe you have some suggestions on this too, reach out to potential partners plus the existing carriers to help fill this gap? Is that the kind of motion?
What does fill the gap mean?
This is why I'm asking the question. I don't.
I guess we're probably looking at existing providers and what incentives we might provide to give them a better
Improve
incentive to
access or
invest in,
infrastructure.
yes, to invest in their infrastructure, to provide access, et cetera.
Can I add something to your
Yeah.
motion? So I think along with that, I think it would be interesting to get some information on the Davenport Bettendorf model, because that is sort of what they did. They incentivized a private company to come in and put the infrastructure in via a tax abatement program. So I would be curious to get some more data on that.
All right, I'm going to make an effort at this, and you can wordsmith this. So I move that we direct staff to work with private sector companies to improve the quality and scope of internet service. That's number one. And number two, to specifically investigate the Davenport Bettendorf model. How'd I do?
Second.
All right.
Would you, would you read the first part of your motion again, please?
Move that we direct staff to work with private sector companies to improve the quality and scope of internet service in Ames, something to that effect.
Just to point of clarification, is that implying and telling staff that they should be working with internet providers and just get the internet improved, or you want them to explore ways to improve it?
And report back.
Go ahead.
Explore ways and it does kind of sound like a command to staff to improve things using collaboration with providers.
Okay.
That's how I listen to it.
So thanks for clarifying. So then the operative verb is to explore ways with the
Right. What are the barriers? Is there anything that the city can do to help reduce those
That was
barriers?
my understanding where you were going. I just want to make sure that we understand.
Thank you.
That the motion is clear.
My question was, it existing providers
I think that makes sense to start.
start with?
I guess I would defer to staff on this.
In case somebody else is interested through this dialogue, they may
Right.
approach us and show some interest.
I wouldn't not talk to somebody that approaches you.
Absolutely.
And does this have any particular focus on the policies, the 3 policies that are mentioned in here? Or is that just left up to?
It's a good question, Gloria. I think that's sort of another subject for another motion.
Or may I suggest, the way your motion is phrased, maybe the fact that these are already been identified can be part of the discussion points with those providers to see if that would be, I mean,
Right.
staff already has that data or has that information that kind of help them discuss it.
In other words, given the council goal that that's our launching point, that identifies what improve means,
Mhm.
right?
Right.
So I'm comfortable with that.
Okay, so let's, just so Amy's got it clear, could you read the motion one more time and make sure we're on the same page?
I don't know if I can do it 3 times.
Can
in a
you do
row.
it, Amy?
Can you sing it for us?
Amy, can you do it?
Direct staff to work with private sector companies to explore the quality and scope of internet service in Ames and to investigate more information on the Bettendorf Davenport models.
You said somebody offering incentives, didn't you? Did someone say that? Or no?
I mean, I think I
That wasn't
mentioned
it?
that as one of, as the Bettendorf Davenport.
That's part of their model, yeah.
This motion is read back, says to explore the quality and scope of internet service. Should it say improve? Like to explore ways to improve, or is this good enough?
I think Steve knows what we want.
I think it's implicit in that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Everyone clear on the motion? Further discussion? Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Anything else?
I have a motion related to the subdivisions, and I'm a little puzzled about what to do because of what Chuck told us tonight. But let me just put the motion on the floor. We can talk about it if it gets a second. So I'd move to have staff report on possible modifications to the subdivision code to require new subdivision housing to be internet ready for some reasonable meaning of internet ready.
A second.
Okay, discussion.
I mean, it seems reasonable, and it seems like what Chuck was saying is that they do it already. It's an expectation, no biggie. So, I mean, I suppose, hopefully, a requirement to do it isn't putting anyone out, right? I mean, it seems like it wouldn't.
Unless they can't get responses.
Yeah,
Right, but I mean, they still, yeah, I mean, but still putting it in so at some future date, right? That's what we would.
You can put the
I think
conduit
just-
in. You put the conduit in even.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's what I mean.
Or you could put dark fiber in.
Right.
But they could make a deal with one provider too. and
Correct.
It was mentioned, and sometimes that means they're
Skinny cut.
essentially locked out of.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
But maybe it's enough to decide that internet ready means that they put in some fiber that maybe someone could theoretically use. That, I mean, maybe that's all we can get. I don't know yet.
Well, I think it would be helpful to bring this up in further detail with the providers
Yeah.
and understand if we had certain requirements, what would that do or not do? How would the person doing the development, how would the developer interact with the provider to make it happen? What would the benefit to that policy be? So we could talk about that further.
So I think two things to keep in mind. Chuck mentioned that they do that. I'm not sure everybody does. So
Yeah.
Right.
requiring it is something that
a
makes
good point,
sense, or at least looking at it as an option. The second piece, and I guess I understand maybe talking about putting fiber in the ground, but if you take fiber and you run it to the end of a property and there's no plans to ever connect it to anything, all you've done is raise the cost of that infrastructure with no hope of ever connecting. It's the sidewalk, or in this case, a super highway to nowhere.
Yeah.
And so there's that piece of it to balance as we go through that process.
I think we also heard from Bo that, we could require this to be done, but without requiring particular specs that are actually compatible with what MediaCom needs or what CenturyLink or whoever the provider is needs, then we aren't really helping matters.
Yeah.
So,
Well, what it does is it shifts the cost to the developer and the ultimate homeowner to make up the difference in the ROI.
but what I'm saying is, I think what I heard was if the city places requirements on this, that it would be more helpful to actually have some sort of requirement for the specs.
Connected service rather than.
Yeah.
equipment.
Just a staff report, David.
Yeah, it's just a staff report. And I think this is all in the scope of, like, if you have a good way to crack this nut, then I'd like to hear about it.
So we're not basically proposing a modification to an ordinance or whatever. It's just basically, at this point in time, it's just have staff explore this.
Yes.
Come back, and it's going to be more discussion as we move forward. And I presume we've been engaging developers, internet providers, the whole 9 yards in this conversation.
Yeah, and that's what I meant by move to report on possible modifications to subdivision code. I'm not asking for an ordinance.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Discussion? Those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Anything else? All right.
Maybe just again, reiterate what you said, John. A lot of people came tonight, and I love it when people come to their first city council meeting. So you had to use your Google search to figure out where we were. That was cool. I also want to say thank you to David. This has been an issue for David for a long time, and that was, in fact, one of the reasons he ran for city council was this is a priority. So, David, we need to say thank you to you for your leadership and continuing. You've invested. You gone to conferences and done a lot of reading, and you've made this really cool chart. And so we appreciate your leadership in helping us make a good decision.
Well, thank you for saying that, Tim. I can give you a new chart every 15 minutes. So.
Can we all learn to make our own chart?
It's a secret.
Let's
Yeah.
not say we did, David. How's that sound? So, thank you all for coming. For those that are interested in other topics coming up, you're welcome to obviously stay. But otherwise, we're going to move on to item 23. Item 23, ordinances. Third passage and adoption of ordinance number 4374 related to development standards of the neighborhood commercial zoning district.
Move on third.
Second.
All right, roll call, please.
Aye.
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 Item 24, third passage and adoption of ordinance number 4375 to allow alternate landscape plan approval in conjunction with a special use permit.
Move on third.
Second.
Roll call.
Aye.
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 Okay, disposition of communications to council. We have one item, letter from Ben Jensen. Council should have it on the desk in front of you.
This would be just a memo from staff on this one, I assume.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
I move we get a memo from staff.
Second.
Topic.
All right. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. All right, council comments. Gloria.
I don't think I have any tonight.
Chris?
I do not have anything tonight.
David?
Nothing to me. I'm really grateful for everyone who came, though.
Rylan?
Just gonna look on my calendar, see if there's anything coming up. Is there? This isn't
We
a
haven't
trick
done-
question, though. We
we
did
haven't-
practice our routine. I don't have anything.
Nothing tonight.
Nope.
All right.
Move to adjourn.
All right, we are adjourned.